The light from a dying star filtered through the ceiling, casting prismatic hues on the polished obsidian floor. Whispered conversations, in countless languages, formed a cacophony of tension. All eyes turned toward the central dais, where council leader Zavorian stood, his elongated form shimmering with bioluminescent patterns. Order, Zavorian's voice, amplified by the chamber's acoustics, cut through the noise like a blade. His gaze swept the room, his compound eyes glinting with authority. Today, we convene to address the matter of Earth's declaration. The whispers ceased. Earth, a world long dismissed as inconsequential, had made a bold claim. They intended to join the war against the Vork, the galaxy's most destructive force. For centuries, humans had been viewed as a curiosity at best, a fragile species clinging to an obscure spiral arm of the galaxy. The chamber doors slid open with a soft hiss, and William Bill Hastings stepped into the atrium, the human diplomat, clad in a sharp black suit accented with the insignia of Earth's unified government, walked with measured confidence. His graying hair and sharp blue eyes gave him an air of experience, but it was the resolute set of his jaw that silenced the faint murmurs. Behind him trailed two aides, but it was clear Hastings needed no entourage to command attention. He reached the center of the chamber and stood before the council, unflinching under the scrutiny of dozens of alien species. Zavorian regarded him with a mix of curiosity and skepticism. Earth's representative, Zavorian began, you have requested this audience to proclaim your intent to enter the war. Explain yourselves. Hastings allowed a moment of silence to stretch, the weight of the room pressing down on him. Then, with a voice that carried the clarity of a man who had faced worse, he began, Honored members of the Galactic Council, I stand before you not to ask permission, but to inform you. Humanity will fight. The reaction was immediate. The chamber erupted in laughter, a discordant symphony of disbelief and mockery. Delegates from the high-gravity world stomped their clawed feet in amusement, while aquatic representatives emitted bubbling sounds of derision. Even Zavorian's luminescent patterns flickered in what could only be interpreted as amusement. Hastings waited, his expression unchanging. When the laughter finally subsided, he spoke again, his tone sharper. You find this humorous because you have forgotten the nature of war. Humanity has not. A ripple of unease passed through the room. Hastings took a step forward, his voice growing colder. For centuries we have been mocked, labeled as primitive and underestimated. Yet, in our isolation, we have endured wars that reshaped our world. Wars that devastated civilizations, and yet forged us into what we are today. You believe we are weak because we have not flaunted our strength. You are wrong. Zavorian tilted his head, the glow of his bioluminescence dimming. Bold words, human, but words do not win battles. What does Earth bring to the table that the rest of us have not already provided? Hastings's lips curled into a faint smile, one devoid of warmth. History, ingenuity, resilience. While you have relied on centralized fleets and overwhelming force, we have perfected the art of adaptation. We have faced annihilation and emerged stronger every time. The chamber grew quieter, the laughter replaced by an undercurrent of unease. A reptilian delegate hissed, Your claims are bold, but the Vork are unlike any enemy you faced. They devour worlds. What can your species possibly contribute? Hastings turned his gaze to the delegate, his voice dropping to a near whisper that carried across the room. What humanity brings, you cannot measure by conventional means. We have developed technologies in secret, prepared for threats even as you dismissed us. We have strategies born of necessity, honed by conflict. And most importantly, we have a will to survive that your galaxy has never encountered. For the first time, there was no rebuttal. The chamber seemed to hold its collective breath. Hastings stepped back, glancing at Zavorian. You laugh because you think we're still the fledgling species you encountered centuries ago. But let me ask you this. When was the last time any of you truly fought for survival? When was the last time you faced extinction and refused to bow? Zavorian's gaze narrowed, his bioluminescent patterns flickering erratically. Your bravado is impressive, but it remains to be seen if your actions will match your words. Hastings's eyes hardened. Then consider this our warning. We join this war not because we seek glory, but because we refuse to let creatures like the Vork dictate the fate of the galaxy. But if any here doubt our resolve, remember this. Earth's wars were not fought for conquest. They were fought for survival. And survival is what we do best, without waiting for a response. Hastings turned and began walking toward the exit, his aides following in silence. The echoes of his footsteps were the only sound in the chamber as the delegates exchanged uneasy glances. At the doorway, Hastings paused and looked back, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. You may think humanity insignificant now, but soon you will remember why we have been left in peace for so long. Be ready. With that, he exited the chamber, leaving behind a room filled with doubt, fear, and the faintest glimmer of respect. The Galactic Council had laughed at humanity, but the seed of unease had been planted. For the first time, the galaxy began to wonder, what had Earth been hiding all these years? The war room deep beneath Earth's surface thrummed with quiet urgency. Monitors lined the walls, casting a cold, bluish glow over the faces of the people gathered around a central holographic table. Maps of star systems, supply routes, and Vork fleet formations floated in midair, shifting with every tap of a console. The air was thick with tension, the kind that only came when survival itself hung in the balance. Johnson Charles stood at the head of the table, his arms crossed over his broad chest. His expression was as unreadable as the data scrolling across the screens, but his eyes burned with focus. A man of few words, Johnson had risen through the ranks not with charisma, but with an unrelenting dedication to results. He had spent decades preparing for a moment just like this, though even he couldn't have predicted it would arrive under these circumstances. He glanced across the table at Tom Rivers, who was furiously swiping through schematics on a handheld device. Tom's fingers moved with the frenetic energy of someone who had too many ideas and not enough time. His hair was disheveled, his glasses slightly askew, but his mind was sharper than ever. We need to accelerate Project Chimera's timeline, Tom said, his voice tight. If the Vork launch a preemptive strike, we'll barely have enough to deploy one prototype, let alone a full squadron. Johnson's gaze didn't waver. You've been asking for more time since the day this project started, Tom. We don't have it anymore. Make it work. Tom exhaled sharply but nodded, his fingers resuming their dance over the schematics. Fine, but don't expect miracles. Gabriel Hunt leaned against the far wall, arms folded as he watched the exchange. A soldier through and through, Gabriel's scars told stories that words never could. His dark eyes were keen, constantly assessing, always calculating. Tom's right, you know, Gabriel said, his voice low but firm. Rushing untested tech into the field is a recipe for disaster. We've seen it before, and we've won despite it, Johnson shot back, his tone cutting through the room like a blade. This isn't just about the tech or the tactics. This is about sending a message to the Vork and to the Council. We're not playing by their rules anymore. Gabriel pushed off the wall and stepped closer to the table, his presence commanding without needing to try. If you want to send a message, Johnson, make sure it's one we can back up. Otherwise, we're just as arrogant as they think we are. The tension between them was palpable, but it wasn't antagonistic. It was born from years of mutual respect, forged in the crucible of hard decisions and harder consequences. Johnson didn't respond immediately, his focus shifting back to the holographic map. The Vork don't wait for perfection. They're moving faster than we are, which means every delay costs lives. If you have a better plan, Gabriel, now's the time. Gabriel smirked faintly, the kind of smile that came from knowing there was no easy answer. We'll make do. We always do. The room fell silent for a moment, save for the hum of the holograms and the faint tapping of Tom's fingers. Then Johnson turned to the hologram, his voice steady but laced with an undercurrent of urgency. We've been underestimated for too long. The Council thinks we're playing catch-up, but they have no idea what we've been building. We've got the element of surprise, and we're going to use it. The hologram shifted, displaying a massive shipyard hidden within the asteroid belt. Rows of sleek, dark ships lined the facility, their surfaces bristling with weapons unlike anything the galaxy had seen. These weren't the bulky, utilitarian ships of the other Council species. These were designed with purpose, efficiency, and lethality in mind. This, Johnson said, gesturing to projection, is the Vanguard fleet. 10 years of covert development. The Council doesn't know it exists, and neither do the Vork. We'd been waiting for the right moment to reveal it. Tom's eyebrows shot up. 10 years? How did you keep this under the radar? Carefully, Johnson replied, his tone leaving no room for elaboration. And that's not all. Project Chimera isn't just a weapon. It's a force multiplier. If we can deploy even one squadron, it could turn the tide of this war. Gabriel studied the hologram, his expression thoughtful. Impressive, but none of it matters if we can't get boots on the ground. Ships don't win wars. People do. Johnson nodded, which is why you'll be leading the ground operations. You've got the experience, and more importantly, the trust of the men and women who'll be fighting alongside you. Gabriel didn't respond immediately. He didn't need to. His silence was answer enough. Finally, he said, I'll need time to train them. Real combat scenarios, not simulations. You'll have it, Johnson said, but not much. We're on borrowed time. Tom cleared his throat, drawing their attention back to him. And speaking of borrowed time, there's something else you need to know. The Vork aren't just a threat because of their numbers or their weapons. They're learning, adapting. Every engagement we've had with them, they've adjusted their tactics. They're not mindless brutes. There's something else entirely. The room grew colder, the weight of Tom's words settling over them. Johnson's jaw tightened, but his voice remained steady. Then we'll adapt faster. Gabriel's gaze flicked to Tom, then back to Johnson. And if we can't? Johnson's eyes met Gabriel's unflinching. We will. The conversation was interrupted by a soft chime from the comms panel. A voice crackled through the speakers, distorted but urgent. Sir, you need to see this. Johnson stepped to the console and activated the feed. The hologram shifted again, this time displaying a distant sector of space. Dozens of Vork ships were massing, their formations shifting like a living organism. It was a show of force, a declaration of intent. They weren't waiting for humanity to make the first move. Tom swore under his breath, his earlier confidence slipping. Gabriel straightened, his demeanor hardening into one of readiness. Johnson stared at the display, his mind already calculating the implications. They're testing us, he said quietly. They want to see if we'll blink. Gabriel's voice was calm, but there was a fire behind it. So, what's the play? Johnson turned back to the room, his expression unyielding. We don't blink. Assemble the fleet. Prepare the Chimera prototypes. And send a message to the Council. Earth is ready. The room erupted into activity, the quiet urgency replaced by the controlled chaos of preparation. Johnson watched for a moment, his mind racing with possibilities and contingencies. Then he turned to Gabriel and Tom, his voice low but resolute. This is what we've been waiting for. Let's show them what humanity is capable of. As the two men nodded and moved to their respective tasks, Johnson allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. The stakes had never been higher, and the risks were immeasurable. But deep down, he knew one thing with absolute certainty. Humanity was ready to fight, and they wouldn't stop until they had proven, once and for all, that they were not to be underestimated. The silence of space was shattered by the sudden emergence of the Vanguard fleet, its sleek, obsidian ships slipping out of hyperspace like predators stalking their prey. The Vork armada stretched before them, an amalgamation of monstrous, organic vessels that pulsed with a malevolent energy. They moved in coordinated patterns, a terrifying display of intelligence and instinct. Aboard the Erebus, the command ship of the Vanguard fleet. Johnson Charles stood on the bridge, his expression carved from stone. The faint hum of the ship's systems filled the air, punctuated by the occasional murmur of officers at their stations. The atmosphere was tense, a coiled spring waiting to snap. Enemy ships holding position, reported Lieutenant Aaron Blake, his voice steady but strained. No aggressive maneuvers yet. Johnson nodded, his gaze locked on the tactical display hovering in front of him. It showed the Vork fleet as a pulsating red mass, its tendrils snaking toward their position. "They're watching us," Johnson said, his voice low. "Trying to gauge what we'll do. Then let's not disappoint them," Gabriel Hunt said from his post near the rear of the bridge, clad in his battle armor. He looked every inch the warrior he was. His tone was calm, almost casual, but his eyes burned with the anticipation of battle. Tom Rivers appeared on the central display from the engineering deck, his face slick with sweat. Chimera prototypes are online, but they're still untested in real combat scenarios. If this goes south— "It won't," Johnson interrupted, his voice cutting through the room like a knife. "We've prepared for this. The Vork think they're facing a standard fleet engagement. They don't know what we've brought to the table." Tom exhaled, nodding reluctantly. "Then I hope the hell this works. Chimera systems are ready to deploy on your command." Johnson turned to the communication officer. "Patch me through to the fleet." A moment later, his voice echoed across the ships. "This is Charles. Remember your training, trust your crew, and keep your focus. The Vork want us to flinch. Prove to them we don't know how. Engage on my signal. Charles out." The bridge fell silent as everyone braced for the inevitable. The Vork ships began to shift, their formations flexing like the muscles of a living creature. Their intent was clear. They were preparing to strike. "Captain," Blake said, his voice tight, "the Vork are locking weapons. They're about to open fire." Johnson's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing. "Not if we hit them first. Gabriel, is your team in position?" Gabriel grinned, his hand resting on the hilt of his combat knife. "Locked and loaded. Just say the word." Johnson nodded. "Blake, target their lead vessels. Fire on my mark. Gabriel, you'll deploy immediately after the first salvo. Hit them hard and fast." The seconds stretched into eternity. Johnson raised his hand, his eyes never leaving the Vork fleet. Then, with a sharp motion, he brought it down. "Fire." The Erebus shuddered as its railguns discharged, streaking beams of energy through the void. Across the Vanguard fleet, other ships joined the assault, unleashing a torrent of firepower. The Vork ships reacted almost immediately, their organic hulls shifting to absorb the impact. Explosions rippled across their ranks, but the damage seemed minimal. "Minimal penetration," Blake reported, frustration creeping into his voice. "Their defenses are adapting." "They won't adapt to this," Johnson said, his voice cold. "Gabriel, deploy." Gabriel didn't need to be told twice. He and his team were already in the Chimera prototypes, sleek, humanoid exosuits designed for both space and terrestrial combat. As the airlock depressurized, Gabriel's voice crackled over the comms. "Team Chimera, we're green for launch. Let's show them what humanity's made of." The Chimera suits launched from the Erebus like darts, each one equipped with advanced thrusters and weaponry. Gabriel led the charge, his suit's HUD lighting up with targeting data. "Stick to the plan," he barked. "Take out their command nodes and disrupt their coordination. No heroics." The team moved as one, weaving through the chaos of the battle. Vork fighter drones swarmed toward them, their jagged forms slicing through the void. Gabriel's suit twisted to avoid a barrage of plasma bolts, his retort a precise burst from his railgun that obliterated the drone in a flash of light. First node in sight came the voice of Callum Drake, one of Gabriel's men. "Moving to engage." "Cover him," Gabriel ordered, his suit's targeting systems locking onto an approaching wave of drones. He fired in controlled bursts, clearing a path for Callum. The young soldier's suit latched onto the Vork node, a pulsating, organic structure bristling with tendrils, and unleashed a payload of explosives. The node erupted in a brilliant explosion, sending shockwaves through the Vork formation. "Node destroyed," Callum reported, his voice tinged with exhilaration. "Good work," Gabriel said, already scanning for the next target. "Keep the pressure on. We're not done yet." Back on the Erebus, Johnson watched the battle unfold on the tactical display. The destruction of the node had caused a ripple of confusion among the Vork ships, their movements becoming erratic. "It's working," Tom said over the comms. "Their coordination is breaking down." "Then we press the advantage," Johnson said. "Blake, direct all fire on their disorganized units. Don't let them regroup." The Erebus and its fleet unleashed another barrage, targeting the vulnerable Vork ships. Explosions rippled across the enemy lines, and for the first time, the Vork seemed to falter. But the moment of triumph was short-lived. A massive Vork ship, larger than any they'd encountered before, emerged from the shadow of its smaller counterparts. Its hull was a shifting mass of organic material, and its weapons glowed with an ominous red light. "Sir," Blake said, his voice laced with dread, "we've got a new contact. Designation unknown, but it's big." Johnson's eyes narrowed. "What's its status?" "Charging weapons," Blake replied. "Whatever it's about to fire, we won't survive a direct hit." Johnson's mind raced. The new ship wasn't just a threat. It was a statement. The Vork were showing that they, too, had been holding back. He turned to the comms officer. "Get me Gabriel." Gabriel's voice crackled through the comms. "Charles, we see it. What's the play?" Johnson didn't hesitate. "You and your team take it out. Whatever that thing's about to fire, it can't be allowed to go off." Gabriel's response was immediate. "Understood. We're on it." As the Chimera team altered course, Johnson turned back to the tactical display, his expression grim. The battle was far from over, and the cost of victory was rising with every passing second. But he couldn't afford to think about that now. Humanity had made its first strike, and the galaxy was watching. The Erebus was a symphony of chaos and control as alarms blared, and the ship's systems strained to keep up with the escalating battle. The massive Vork flagship loomed in the center of the tactical display, its glowing red core pulsating like a heart on the brink of eruption. Johnson Charles stood at the command console, his hands gripping its edge as though sheer will alone could turn the tide. "Status report," he barked. Lieutenant Aaron Blake's voice was sharp, cutting through the cacophony. "Vork flagship's weapon core is fully charged. Impact in 70 seconds unless we neutralize it." Johnson's jaw tightened. 70 seconds. Not enough time, but it would have to be. His mind raced through the possibilities, discarding one after another. On the display, Gabriel Hunt's Chimera team streaked toward the flagship like arrows loose from a bow. "Gabriel," Johnson said into the comms, his voice steady despite the storm raging around him, "you're our last line. That core has to go offline. Do whatever it takes." On the other end of the line, Gabriel's voice was calm, resolute. "Understood. We'll make it count." Inside his Chimera suit, Gabriel's HUD lit up with targeting data as he led his team toward the flagship's glowing core. The structure was alive, pulsing with a malevolence that sent shivers down his spine. It wasn't just a weapon. It was a statement, a symbol of the Vork's dominance. And it was his job to end it. "Stay tight," Gabriel ordered his team. "Callum, take point. Jules, keep the drones off us. This is going to get ugly." The team moved with precision, weaving through the Vork's organic defenses. Drones swarmed them in waves, their jagged forms spitting plasma and acid. Jules Carson's railgun flared as he picked off targets with deadly accuracy, while Callum Drake used the suit's thrusters to outmaneuver their attackers. "We're almost there," Gabriel said, his eyes locked on the core. Its surface writhed like living flesh, and tendrils of energy arced outward, scorching the space around it. "Callum, get that payload ready. Jules, cover him." "On it," Callum replied, his voice tense but focused. His suit's arm extended, revealing a cylindrical device bristling with explosives. As they approached the core, the resistance intensified. The drone seemed to sense the team's intent, converging on them in a furious swarm. "We're not going to make it like this," Jules shouted, his railgun overheating as he fired into the mass. "Too many of them." Gabriel gritted his teeth. He had always known this mission would come at a cost, but the weight of that knowledge didn't make the decision any easier. "Callum, get to the core. Jules, and I will draw them off." Callum hesitated for a split second, his training warring with his instincts. Then he nodded. "Copy that. Don't die on me." "No promises," Gabriel said with a grim smile. He and Jules veered off, their suits' thrusters flaring as they unleashed a barrage of firepower. The drones followed, drawn by the sudden shift in movement. "Gabriel," Jules said, his voice tight with strain, "you better have a plan for getting out of this." Gabriel didn't answer. His focus was on the drones, each one a deadly obstacle that needed to be eliminated. "Just keep firing," he said. "We don't stop until Callum's done." Back on the Erebus, Johnson watched the scene unfold with an intensity that bordered on desperation. The tactical display showed the Chimera team's positions, each blip a fragile lifeline. Tom Rivers' voice came over the comms, edged with urgency. "The core's energy readings are spiking. If they don't take it out in the next 30 seconds, it's game over." Johnson clenched his fists, his mind racing for options. There were none. All he could do was watch and trust. Callum reached the core, the explosive device primed in his hands. He could feel the heat radiating from the structure, a palpable reminder of the power it contained. "I'm in position," he said, his voice steady despite the chaos. "Arming the payload." "Hurry it up!" Gabriel's voice came over the comms, strained but still commanding. He and Jules were barely holding the drones at bay, their ammunition running dangerously low. The device latched onto the core with a satisfying click. Callum's suit's HUD lit up with a countdown. "Payload armed. Detonation in 20 seconds. Get out of there," Gabriel ordered. Callum didn't move. His suit systems had taken too much damage during the approach, and the thrusters were offline. "Can't," he said, his voice calm despite the finality of the situation. "It's been an honor, sir." "Callum," Gabriel started, but the young soldier cut him off. "Finish the fight," Callum said. Then the line went dead. The explosion was blinding, a supernova of light and energy that engulfed the core and rippled outward. The Vork flagship shuddered, its organic hull fracturing and collapsing in on itself. The energy buildup dissipated in a brilliant cascade, taking the ship with it. On the bridge of the Erebus, a stunned silence fell as the tactical display updated. The flagship was gone, and the Vork fleet was in disarray. For the first time, the tide of the battle had turned decisively in humanity's favor. Johnson exhaled, the tension in his shoulders easing just slightly. "Blake, status report. Vork fleet is retreating," Blake said, his voice tinged with awe. "They're falling back." Johnson nodded. "Good. But we're not done yet. Pursue and eliminate. Make sure they know this wasn't a lucky break." As the crew sprang into action, Johnson allowed himself a moment to reflect. Callum's sacrifice weighed heavily on him, but it wasn't in vain. Humanity had struck a blow that the galaxy would remember. Gabriel's voice crackled over the comms. "We're heading back to the Erebus. What's left of us, anyway." "You did good, Gabriel," Johnson said. Callum would be proud. Gabriel didn't respond immediately. When he did, his voice was softer, tinged with sorrow. "This isn't over, is it?" "No," Johnson said. "But today, we showed them what we're capable of. The galaxy knows now. Humanity isn't just surviving. We're fighting back." The Vork fleet disappeared into the void, leaving behind the wreckage of their arrogance. On the bridge of the Erebus, Johnson Charles stood tall, his gaze fixed on the stars. The war was far from over, but for the first time, humanity had proven they were not prey, not fodder, but equals. and the galaxy would never underestimate them again.